All right. So again, you guys know, if you've noticed some of my content, it seems a little bit dreary the last couple of days. I have been dealing with a lot of stuff with my family. Again, not getting into the nitty gritty. Those that know me have heard some of my story. My story continues to grow like all of ours. So I will lead out by saying this. The reason I wanted to jump on tonight is I wanted to talk about labels. I've been toying with the idea in my head all day about labels. I sent a message to one of my friends in Instagram about labels and how we all have them and all that. So here's just a couple of thoughts on labels. Let's first use the military. We are all labeled by something in the military. Our gender, our rank, our position, all these other things before we even start out at the starting line, right? So let me use me as an example. When I was a young soldier, I was a male, I was a private, was my rank. My position when I was in basic training was just trainee. So before I even got started doing anything, I had a label of being a private, being a man, being a trainee, and all these things. So before I even started in anything, there was all these things that were given to me as a label. And a lot of times in life with a label, there comes a natural connotation with that. I'll give you an example. Soldier. Most people in the United States, when they hear soldier, they may know specifically that that's used to reference an army person. But many people hear soldier and they reference it being as somebody that is serving the military. It may not be the correct terminology for the branch, but they generally understand what soldier means. Let me use another title, or another label, excuse me. Let me use the label teacher. Most people would understand what a teacher is. Most people would understand the role of a teacher, the goals of a teacher, etc. So that's a label that that person might have. What I found in my military career is that we add a bunch of other labels to some of these already prescribed labels. So I'll give you another example. A teacher is an 8th grade mathematics teacher. So now you're adding very specified things to that. And you guys understand where I'm going with this. The list goes on and on with the amount of labels. What if I said police officer as a label / title? What if I said firefighter? Everybody has a general idea. And in most circles, those labels or those titles have a positive connotation, the ones I just referenced. Sure, there are people that feel certain ways about law enforcement, firefighters, soldiers, etc. But generally speaking, those all have a positive connotation. More specifically for things going on with me, what if somebody has a label that has a negative connotation? What if somebody has a label like attention deficit disorder? What do you think of then? Is it naturally a positive thought that goes to your head? Is it negative? Is it neutral? Do you start drawing parallels to people that you know in this world that may fall into that category or have that label? Or perhaps you know somebody that's had this label in the past and maybe they were miscategorized, or maybe they were misdiagnosed, or maybe this diagnosis wasn't an actual thing. I'm very loosely paralleling things in my life, and I'm not going to get into very many specifics, but I will say, what about the word trauma as a label? Is it physical trauma? Is it an injury? Is it an ailment? Is it a non-visible injury, maybe going on in somebody's brain, or more specifically, somebody's mind or thoughts? Do you ever think of the word trauma in a positive way? You know, the growth mindset that we all find ourselves in, specifically me, is that when we hear certain labels or titles, as you were, we naturally gravitate towards what we think those mean and how they apply to our world and how they apply to our specific situation that we're in, or the group of people we're around, or the organization that we're in. So what if you started adding all those titles up before you ever had an opportunity to meet somebody? What if you were formally introduced to somebody with only these titles? How would that make you feel? Would you have a preconceived notion of how you think they should be, how they should act, how they should interact, how they should carry themselves? Because I know for me, in the military specifically, when I hear certain titles and I see labels on people, on organizations, etc., almost every single one of them to me comes with its own bias or comes with its own personality, so to speak, and how I interact and how I engage with that label, with that title. For example, a lot of people know about Navy SEALs. So if you're talking specifically about the military and you say that there's a lieutenant commander who's a Navy SEAL, who was a task unit commander, who now writes books and is a leadership guru and has his own supplement line, I'm obviously referring to Jocko. If you guys hear something like that without ever meeting him, you're naturally going to have a perception, or you're going to have some generalized understanding of what you think that person is going to be like and how they are, in life and how they interact with everybody. Sometimes that can lead to our dismay. Everybody's heard the title, or everybody's heard the phrase, "Don't judge a book by its cover." And in some cases, as we know, the title of the book, the preface of the book, the foreword, and all those things about the book are dead spot on with what the title of the book is. So there are some cases where you can read a book, the cover. This is for you, Lauren, where you can read a book and you look at the title and you look at the cover and you get a generalized idea of what it is. And naturally, there's a million examples. There's a million examples of how that's not the case. But let me bring that back around to how that goes on in my world recently. A lot of us have these titles and a lot of us have these labels. And I have to tell you, there are times where it's very difficult to see past some of those labels, and it's very difficult sometimes to see past all those other things that sometimes cloud everybody, or kind of people carry through life or go through life with these labels. I find it hard to believe that when I finally retire from the military, anybody that truly knows me, I find it hard to believe that anybody could actually think about me and the way I am in my career and all these things, that truly knows me, without ever referencing the military or positions I've held, et cetera, right? It's just kind of part of who I am. For me, it's a very, very large part of who I am. But if I made tireless efforts to separate myself from that title, from that label, even with a long career that I will end up having, there is a chance that one day I could finally remove all those labels and continue to rebrand and reintroduce myself in a lot of positive ways, in other ways that people that started to know me and interact with me, if I made efforts to not talk about it and not do those things, I think eventually I would find a group of people that may not use that label for me as soldier, as civilian, as army, or whatever the label might be. But here's kind of the shitty part. When you start talking about some of these very negative labels, some of these diagnoses, some of these very pressing labels and titles, whether it's schizophrenic, whether it's sociopath, whether it's hyperactive, whether it's whatever the thing is, reactive attachment disorder, dissociative behavioral disorder. Again, we talked about attention deficit disorder. Sometimes those things are very, very difficult to shake off and cast away. And a lot of times in life, as people go through and navigate on their journey, sometimes those labels stick with them for the right reason. I mean, sometimes those labels stick with people, and rightly so, they should. And other times people work tirelessly to get those labels removed, from their model or how they introduce themselves to the world. And why I want to say labels are so important is because in my life, in my circumstances now, all of us in my family, we all carry labels. Some of them positive, some of them negative, of course. We're all fallible humans. We're all just living our best life, doing the best we can. But a lot of times things are very, very difficult when these labels are thrown around or they stick to us, And sometimes those labels are 100% appropriate, and sometimes they're not. So I guess the moral of this story, and I'd love for you guys to chime in, say something if you want to join or whatever, we can talk more about it. But I refuse to let every label in my life define how my life is going to be. Whether it's my label, whether it's a label on one of my children, my wife, my family. I'm not saying they're not appropriate at times. I'm not saying they're not accurate. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is, at some point in all of our lives, we have the ability to get past it. I'll use myself as an example. And this one's going to sting me a little bit, but I'm ready for it. You know, at one point in my life, not too distant past, some might have labeled me as a drunk or overusing alcohol or one of those things, right? But I've gotten rid of that label. I don't carry that label anymore of possibly being an alcoholic or a drunk. I don't carry that label anymore. But I might have at one time. I'm sure if you ask the right person at the wrong time or wrong person at the right time, based on where I was at in my life and my path, they may have labeled that. They may have put that label on me. I might have put that label on myself. In a lot of ways, I owned that label and I carried that label for a little bit of time in my life. But I was able to get through it through the grace of God, my salvation, my coming to the cross, my friends, my family, my good friend Gary Carter, and others. I don't have that label anymore. And there's a few other labels that I once had that I don't have anymore. And hell, there's a whole bunch of new labels that I have. By the grace of God and the powers of people around me and my friends and family, I was able to get through many of these things, and I continue to struggle with them to this day. So just because somebody has a label now doesn't mean they're going to be labeled that way forever. And it doesn't mean that it's impossible to change. It doesn't mean that you're not capable of doing so much more than what label somebody gives you or society gives you or your organization gives you, etc. So it's just really important to me to get this message out. Been dealing, like I said, initially, I've been dealing with a lot of things with the family. I'm so very eternally grateful for my loving wife and my mother, specifically out here in Tennessee, who have always supported me and supported our family tirelessly. And I'm not trying to sound sad. I know it's kind of fading off here and sounding a little melancholy. It's just very important to me to put that message out that, we're not defined by the labels that we have wholly, right? Like I'm a lot more than just a soldier. I am more than a father. I am more than a husband. I am more than a son. I've got a lot of other labels and a lot of other titles, just like everybody out there, just like so many of us in the world. If there's a label you don't think fits you, you have, especially as an adult, right? If I'm talking about my kids, if I'm talking about, young children or even, adolescent teenagers or things like that, I understand that it may be difficult to shake that label. And sometimes, you kind of get like Stockholm syndrome with your own label. I don't know if that's a real thing, but you kind of like, I guess it's kind of along the confirmation bias, or really what my pastor referred to as like an end-sum game. Like you think someone labeled you a certain way and you don't really have the skill set or the tools to remove that label. So you just act according to how that label is anyway. They say you're hyperactive and you act hyperactive, even though that may not be truly how you are or what's in your heart at the moment. You act that way because you think it's safe, you think it's comfortable, and you think that's what everybody expects of you. And although there is a giant swath of society that is totally fine with breaking the norms and thinking outside the box and not letting labels define them and not letting people hold them down and being free thinkers and free spirit and free speakers and all that, there still are quite a few, especially youth and young men and women out there that are letting the labels that people have given them throughout life define them. My mom, I don't know if my mom's on here or not, but My mom and I have joked in the past about, it seems like nowadays everybody has something, right? And me and my buddy Alan have talked about it too. Everybody has something, right? Everyone goes through and they want to like glom on to something, some new trend of anxiety or some new trend of stress. And look, I'm not here to say that those things aren't accurate. I'm not here to say that those things could or couldn't be true in each person's life. But it seems like every time you turn the corner, there's somebody that is using that as a badge of honor. They're using the stresses and struggles they go through as a badge of honor, which I applaud when you're digging into doing the work about those things, right? I fully applaud somebody that's able to stand firm in their beliefs, in their struggles, in their tumultuous life, and say, hey man, I'm struggling with anxiety and I'm working through it and I'm doing this and I'm doing that and I'm doing my best to be better and it sucks and it's hurting but I'm getting through it and I'm working it. I'm totally on board with that. I finally came to that realization in my life years ago, when I kind of started on this I have to be better thing, which it took a while to get to. So I'm not saying that people that are saying that are I'm not labeling them or putting a title on them, but if you're going to stand in full face and stand upright and tell the world that you have things going on, the way that I think about it now is like, what's the next thing that you're doing? What's the next thing that you're doing to do that? And look, my buddy Alan just chimed in here, and this is a great point. It doesn't have to define a person, but it's hard to not let it. It takes a huge amount of self-awareness. And, Alan is a good friend of mine, and we've talked quite a bit. He's actually made quite a few very poignant comments back to things that I've said on here or posted on here. And we have a little back and forth about, sometimes it is very difficult to not let it define us, or it's very difficult to say that it doesn't define us, but then in our moments of insecurity and weakness and shame and guilt, we fall right back into that. And I'll be the first one to admit, I fall into that category quite often. I've talked to my mom about it, my wife, Alan, I've talked to others. Like, there's so many times in my life, even to this day, with the amazing career I've been honored to have and very humbled that I've gotten so many great things out of the military and I've met so many amazing people. There's still times that I get very insecure about my own abilities, my leadership abilities, just my interactions, etc. And for me, I know that comes from a position of always looking for the negative and looking at negative things as a way to fix things or a way for me to inject myself to teach others or to learn from them about what's going on and what's going wrong. And like I've said before on here, and I've talked to others, a lot of times for me, that negative bias and that confirmation bias and that insecurity was like a round circle, like dials on a clock that just kept going and kept going. And that's why I kind of introduced that gratitude, that Foxhole series, because I realized then and there in an epiphany moment in June, when I was down in South Carolina, that gratitude is what was missing in my life. Although I was grateful for so many things, the good Lord above, my faith, my family, my health, I wasn't doing a good enough job of showing it. And I think I was starting to, in my own head anyway, I think I was starting to, push that negative too many people. I still hear quite often, and I still work through this and I still struggle with it. I still hear quite often that I make a lot of comments to people about things they're doing or not doing. I make comments, to my friends at work, to my family, make little comments about things that aren't done. And me and my friend Alan have talked a lot about it, and it's something that I constantly am working on. Number one, it's one of my pieces of baggage that I carry into this part of my world. Something that I continuously work on to not be not be passive aggressive about comments and really just, close my mouth when I don't need to say anything that's going to result in, a fight or an argument over something that really doesn't move the needle or, like my mom says, pay the bills. But that's something I continuously work on. So back to the labels part. There I go, man. Warrior. There I go on my tangent. But again, I talk about the labels, right? So a lot of people are bringing these labels to the forefront of social media, of the world. And if you want to wear that label, then wear it proudly, right? If you want to be a label of work in progress, and that's going to be your mantra, that you're going to do a little bit better each day, then wear it proudly and own it. Much like I talk about in here with things that I struggle with, and lately the things I'm struggling with currently. I wish that I didn't have to deal with these things that my wife and family and I are going through. I wish, and I pray so much, and I've prayed probably more in the last 5 years than I ever have. I know factually than I ever have in my life. And it's by the grace of God that my wife and I and family are still here fighting the good fight, and we'll continue to fight the good fight. They say God, there's a phrase that, God only gives you what you can handle. I've heard some variants of that recently. It's not saying that that's not true, but it's kind of like saying not so much giving you only what you can handle, but kind of more pointed in that perhaps some of the biggest struggles that you're dealing with are solely geared for you because you're the perfect suitor. You're the perfect one to do that. And I can tell you many nights I don't feel that way. I do not feel that I am perfectly suited for some of these things that we're dealing with. I feel ill-equipped. I feel unprepared. I feel a little bit hopeless sometimes. I feel a little bit lost sometimes at some of the struggles and some of the things that we have to endure. But I'll give you a great example. Yesterday I took a personal day from work, and throughout all the craziness that's going on, my wife and I ended up having the most amazing giggle session, and it started as one thing and ended as giggling and making funny noises and all these things, right? And I would like to think that was a God designed plan, because he definitely knew that we needed to break the monotony of all the things that are going on. And so he allowed us that time to laugh and just enjoy each other's, playfulness and all these other things. And so those are the things that I'm kind of talking about, right? Just things like that in my life that I firmly believe now are a God designed plan. But back to the labels thing. When we have these labels again, Alan, I did see your comment that you can't break years, you can't break something. I haven't scrolled through it, but you can't break something overnight that's years of a habit. And I would agree. In the military, they want us to be tactical. They want us to do magazine changes as fast as we can, as professionally as we can, as efficient as we can. And they drum it into our heads over and over and over. And there's a thing called a training scar, which means if you're doing something wrong and you build in that inefficiency, it becomes difficult to undo later on, and all and on and on and on. I'm really, really, really good at doing that in the military, and I always have been. I've always been really good at being able to, not only do those Army warrior tasks and battle drills, but teaching them and watching others. I've always been really good at those things, or pretty good at those things. But then when it comes to doing these things in life, it's very difficult for me, even now, with all of the stuff that I've endured and all the mindset changes I've tried to make in myself and try to be better. It's still very difficult when you're in the throes of it to take a step back and take that breath and realize, what you need to do and what things you need to kind of peel back in order to get after the root cause of whatever you can, So yes, Alan, you make a great point that it's very difficult to just stop everything, like I've been saying a lot at work, and I've said to others, you can't just turn the Titanic on a dime, you know what I mean? You gotta kind of put the work in, you gotta, steer it, you gotta do a bunch of different stuff in order to get that big boat to get around that iceberg, which I hate to use that analogy because the Titanic didn't work out so well. It actually hit the iceberg, and, then Jack, and we all looked, and Jack and the other girl could have fit on the same dresser and all these other things, right? That was very difficult. So I'm not saying we're the Titanic, but it is difficult to course correct overnight. And that's actually something that I've talked to my son about, my middle son, more recently, maybe the last few months or so. Kind of been talking to him a lot about that course correction, right? Not just, I don't expect this, even though I'm sure at times as a father, I hate to admit this, but it is true. I'm sure at times as a father, being so stern in the military, I'm sure that people in my life think that I have expectations that are high, or that are unachievable, or that I'm just being unrealistic. And that's something that I struggle with also, because I keep very high standards for myself. And a lot of times I emote a lot of those same feelings to other people that just don't feel the same way about certain things as I do. So I'm doing a better job at trying to meet people where they are, just like Jesus did, met them at their point of need, vice me trying to get them to a place where I'll accept them. But more importantly, I talked to my son recently, or I have for the last few months, about like course correcting and owning mistakes and owning the good things and owning all these things. And he sometimes would get very confused about that mindset, or that theory of course correcting. Like, hey, it's okay. It just takes a couple of wins to stack together, and then you're going to have a great week. And a couple of great weeks, you're going to have a great month. There's that mantra, win the hour, win the day, win the month, win the year kind of thing that we all talk about. But believe it or not, there are some people out there that don't understand that. And there's been times in my life even where I haven't really fully embraced that. I'm so focused on fixing things and so focused on the now that it's been difficult for me sometimes to see the long game, or what's in it down the road, or how to kind of relax a little bit to let things kind of mature, just like we do on the battlefield in the military. Sometimes you have to have battlefield patience to see where the enemy is or isn't, or, positions or tactics, strategies, whatever the case may be. So there are a lot of parallels that I have in the military. In one way, I'm very successful at in the military, but some of those parallel efforts in the civilian side, I'm not really as great at. I'm getting a lot better at them, but I'm not as great at, I don't do as well. That seemed like very awkward English. I don't do as well at those things as I do in the military. And I don't know, honestly, if I look intrinsically, I don't know if that's something that I can control. I don't know if that's something that I haven't quite fully grasped or fully bought in. That if I do something on the civilian side and I do it differently in the military, that it is okay. Like, that's still something that I struggle with to this day. But back to the labels. I just want to get that stuff out there about the labels. I find it vitally important that we own the labels that we have, that if we create a label or someone creates a label or a title for us, there's a litany of things, or a myriad of things that we can do with those things. If they're good, if they're bad, we can remove them. We do not have to hide behind them, nor do we have to use those as our reason why we continuously need to go down the black hole, or continuously do these things that are self-fulfilling prophecies, where someone thinks something about us and we just continue to do it. I will say, in my own life, and I know in my wife's life, a lot of this, and my mom, and especially, like, there's a lot of things that we all do, in a lot of ways that we try to break out of things, that take an awful lot of courage. So that's one of the things that I also thought about with labels, today when I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about service. So many people in the military, over the last, war on terrorism era, they're thanked for their service, and they're thanked for all these things. And that brings me to the other point too, just about so many other people that are living this life on this planet and their walk here on earth, is that, there's courageous acts, and there's people of courage all over the place that do very courageous things. And they may not be soldiers, they may not be firefighters, first responders, they may not be all these other things. They could be having that hard conversation with your loved one that takes more courage in your sphere than you've ever had to display. It could be the courage to walk away from a relationship. It could be the courage to defend yourself against something you never thought was going to be possible. It takes a lot of courage. Like I talked about last night on my podcast, I referenced the time when I was in trouble as a youngster, and my mom temporarily kicked me out of the house. And I applauded her on the podcast. Hopefully my mom will listen to it when it drops on Monday. It's very long, Mom. It's like 3 hours if you're listening. But you can listen to it in spurts. You've been listening to me for 44 years. I applauded her efforts, because she's later told me that time in my life when she brought home those cardboard boxes and told me to get out of the house because I was acting a fool, she said it was very difficult for her to do, because my mom and I have always been very close. And, I applauded her, and I do to this day, because I know that was a courageous act, and I know that was something that was very difficult for her to do, but very, very necessary. And so it took, it took a lot of courage for her to hold the line. It brings me to another story of a person that I know that a bunch of years ago was in a bad relationship with their person. It was violent, and there was a lot of bad things going on, and all this and that. And it took a lot of courage for her to stand up to that, and to get away from that, and to say no more, and say, I'm going to hold the line in the sand, and I'm going to show courage at a level in which I never have before, and at a level in which I hope I never have to do again. So I bring that story, all those stories up about courage and labels, because a lot of these things that we're dealing with today with labels and titles, there's a lot of subcategories that go with that. And a lot of it takes, faith, courage, grit, determination, willingness, et cetera, or it takes, insecurity and fear to keep you there, and to keep that label shrouding you, and to keep that label wrapped around you so tightly that you can't move anymore. So I challenge everybody that's out there, if there's a label that you're carrying around, or if there's a label that somebody has given you, or a doctor has given you, you still have the option on how you want to carry that label. You still have the option on how you want to let that define you. Like my friend Alan said on there, you can't change everything overnight. You can't change bad habits overnight. Like we said with the Titanic, you can't course correct in an instant. But let me give you another example. Let's just say that someone gave you the most awful title that you've ever had in your life. Let's just say somebody said that you were unfaithful in your marriage. Let's say someone said that you were a thief, or a liar, or a degenerate, or all these things, right? Let's just say for an instant, that was the label somebody gave you. I did a video on this before, and here's what I said. What if every awful thing everybody ever said about you was true? Now what? What are you going to do now? Because I know that young lady that I just referenced, one of my friends from years ago that had the courage to stand up in an abusive relationship, finally said, so what? That's great. I've got that label. I'm out. I said, hey, you want to call me a drunk, or you want to say that I'm overusing alcohol? Yeah, it hurts. And I still think about it to this day. Now what? So for everybody out there, these labels that we carry as badges of honor, wear them with pride, no matter how much they hurt you, and no matter how much hurt they're causing other people. Wear them with pride so you can be proud of it, so you can put your heart and soul into owning it or removing it the best you can. So if you have labels out there, you have titles that you want, awesome. Let's make you a cape, and let's parade you through the town as honorable, charitable, philanthropic, loving, empathetic, servant leader, whatever the amazing titles that you have, let's wear them proudly. But if you're anxious, you're nervous, you have attention deficit disorder, you can wear that proudly too, so you can finally dig into figuring it out and realizing that you're better than the label that someone gives you, or the label that you give yourself. There's more to life than just a label. There's more to life than living in the shadow of what somebody tells you you have to. And sure, this may mean that you have to get some sort of other help. This may mean that you need to be humble enough to get in community with people that maybe you haven't in the past. And that's okay. Because if you're truly, truly in the game, and you truly want to live like a servant leader, like the 33 years that Jesus walked this planet, where he modeled and demonstrated every great and amazing human behavior that we could ever hope to have in this world, then really take a look at those labels and those titles that we have. I hope everybody has a great evening. Thank you for joining me on this little bit of a diatribe, but it was very important to me to talk about this tonight, about labels, about titles, about courage, and give you some examples of people that I know that have showed, that have demonstrated and exhibited courage on the highest level, without ever once stepping onto a battlefield. So if you're listening out there and you heard that, my hat's off to you for your courage, your commitment, your service, your sacrifice. Despite never having been in the military or a first responder, you're courageous to me. And I hope you guys all have a great evening. Please stay tuned for more in the future. Stay tuned for messages about the Solid 7 podcast, which I think comes out Monday. And as always, I'm on here. I'm here to listen. I'm here to lend whatever help I can for my almost 3 decades of experience in the military. And I just want us to be in community together, and I want us to continue to be the best that we can. I want us to supplant the legacy that we have while we're walking here on this earth. And remember, that dash on the headstone is that dash is the space between your birth year and your death year. How we want to define that and how we want to spend those moments on earth is up to us each day. I hope you guys have a great evening. Thanks again for joining me, and I'll talk to you soon.